Enterprise Resource Planning Systems, or ERP, which emerged in the 1990s, were originally developed as solutions in manufacturing and production planning. These initial offerings expanded to include other back-office functions such as order management, financial management, asset management, and human resources management. As ERP continued to evolve, other sectors began to see the benefits of integration. By the early 2000s, ERP expanded even further to include applications such as grants management, marketing automation, electronic commerce, student systems, and supply chain systems. Because of the availability of integration provided by ERP, more and more higher education institutions began implementing ERP. This presentation will focus on the benefits of ERP in higher education. Almost all organizations can benefit from the use of an ERP system. An ERP can provide access to accurate and timely information. If legacy systems are used when trying to understand an organization's overall performance, there can be several versions of the truth. ERP eliminates this problem through all employees using the same system for information. Table 1 displays data from an article entitled Higher Education ERP Lessons Learned by Dave Swartz and Ken Orgel. This article highlights implementation of ERP at George Washington University and West Virginia University. Looking at the table, we can see that previously a hard copy of budget reports was only provided monthly. Now that an ERP system has been implemented, these budget reports are available daily. Similarly, performance metrics were not available prior to an ERP system, and after implementation, these metrics are now available weekly. ERP can enhance workflow, increase efficiency, and reduce reliance on paper. For example, online digital forms, once completed, follow an automated workflow process that can forward the form along an approval path more rapidly. As you can see from the table, there was a reduction of over 15,000 forms being used. This helps to eliminate error and lost documentation by having the process automated by an ERP system. Internal controls are essential for organizations, as ERP can help tighten those internal controls and provide automated alerts in accordance with those controls. For example, when a department is nearing the end of their budget, an automated email is sent to managers to alert them that they are close to running out of funds. Also, these controls can help keep departments from spending. Table 1 displays the previous lack of available alerts and that they were able to institute 16 new alerts for their organizations. The implementation of an ERP system provides an opportunity for organizations to streamline processes and introduce best business practices. Business process reengineering is a crucial step in implementing an ERP system. By taking the time to adopt the business processes that align with the ERP being implemented, you reduce the amount of customizations that are necessary for your organization to function with the ERP. Also, by documenting policies and procedures and making them available for staff, the process becomes increasingly automated, again, leaving less room for error. We have discussed the basic functions of an ERP that apply to most organizations. So what particular solutions do higher education institutions require? Human resources and financial systems are typical parts that, again, most organizations will require, but what is more specific to higher education? Most universities are nonprofit institutions, therefore there are differences in the way accounting is done in a nonprofit versus a for-profit company. One item of note is the restriction of assets. This is necessary because they must fulfill donor intent. A donor may make a gift that they want only to be used to provide a scholarship. Because of this stipulation, accounting must restrict the gift to only be used for this purpose. If a donor makes an unrestricted gift, it can be marked as such and used at the discretion of the organization. Types of revenue and expenses also affect the accounting at a nonprofit. Many nonprofit organizations rely heavily on the support of grants from the government and private foundations. Certain grants, especially government grants, have stringent reporting guidelines including allocation of staff time, milestones, measurable project goals, etc. One final point is that expenses such as fundraising expenses are unallowable. An unallowable cost is defined as any cost which, under the provisions of any pertinent law, regulation, or sponsored agreement, cannot be included in prices, cost reimbursements, or settlements under the federally sponsored agreement to which is allowable. This means that fundraising salaries, fundraising event expenses, and etc. are not allowed to be applied to federal dollars or grants. Because of the differences in these accounting functions between for-profit and nonprofit organizations, an ERP that is designed with a nonprofit in mind should be selected. Now I'm going to turn it over to Ryan, who's going to discuss with you further what higher education institutions need in an ERP.
Thanks, Aaron. So first I'm going to talk about 2 reasons to consider switching to an ERP in higher education. First, replacing a legacy system has the potential to bring a large number of benefits. Legacy systems tend to grow overcomplex and promote siloed departmental processes, and it's even worse when these siloed departmental processes are entirely on paper, which is sometimes the case. The ERP can reduce and eventually eliminate these siloed departmental processes, and this can bring the potential for faster growth. And now I want to talk about some of the benefits of an ERP system in higher education. Legacy paper-based systems and siloed departmental processes, like I was talking about earlier, are slow to react to certain changing economic landscapes and dealing with federal regulations. For example, the recession of 2008. An ERP can promote faster reaction time to shifting economic realities by having a single version of the truth that is almost always able to be viewed. What this means is, say with a paper-based system or a siloed departmental process, is the financial team has one set of figures on their documents or in their ledger, and then the admissions has completely different numbers. And with paper-based systems, it's really hard for them to interact with each other and see what the other department is dealing with. An example of a federal regulation that universities have had to deal with for a while now would be affirmative action. What an ERP would bring you would be that it could deal with the regulations during the admission process, and it could on the fly adjust admissions and scholarship money as the percentage of admissions change over the course of the year. With paper-based systems, I'm pretty sure what they did was as they received, paper applications, the admissions people would have to actively keep track of the numbers of minorities and the scholarship money. There were all these calculations they had to do. But with an ERP system, it handles most of that on its own, and the admissions people are free to tackle other tasks, like sending out letters and creating events. Another benefit to using an ERP in higher education would be the greater accuracy when you're attempting to do forecasting and planning. For example, with potential enrollment numbers of students going into the future, you have a university that has been growing for a while now, and they are starting to run low on dorms. A great example of this would be Auburn back in 2007. They had just finished building a new engineering school and were starting to get a very large increase in students, higher than they had been used to previously. They had a building plan for dorms that was, I'm not sure exactly how it worked, but it ended up that many of the newer students that were going to be enrolling in Auburn for fall of 2007 were going to end up having to live at apartments near campus, not even in dorms. What happened with Auburn is that they did not engage in accurate planning or forecasting, and the dorms that they decided to build in 2009 really needed to be finished by 2007. They hadn't even started it yet. Another good thing that comes with using an ERP is the fact that you can utilize economies of scale when you're doing bulk purchasing or coordinating purchasing across departments. For example, psychology and philosophy share, I think it's the third floor of Morton Hall, along with English. And I think some of education is still up there, but I can't remember. I think it's secondary education is also on the third floor. But what they do is they coordinate when they're going to buy folders or pencils. Or I remember at one point they all bought 5 file cabinets at the same time, and that's just an example of coordinating purchasing. That wouldn't have been possible if they'd been using paper-based systems. With an ERP and a centralized database, they're able to see what the other departments are doing, and the secretary for each department was like, "Hey, I see you guys ordering a file cabinet. Do you mind maybe picking up 5 instead of just one? We can go for that discount." Uh, Another, what I heard is supposed to be a really good example of, especially Banner, a really good benefit that it brings is that it's easier for deans and departmental chairs to plan future class schedules. And based on what I had heard, um, it's a little confusing how they actually plan future class schedules. There's a lot of factors that go into it. But what Banner brings you is like a single area that you can go to where you can view a lot of information about your professors. You can see where they're at on their tenure, how far they are into their review, letters associated with this professor. You can view feedback about the professor. You can see what classes they've taught in the past, how many times they've taught these classes, whether it was during the fall or the spring or the summer. Just a lot of various information that can be very helpful. And with a paper-based system, I don't even know how you'd find a lot of this information. You'd have to crawl through so many different file cabinets, all these different folders. But then ERP, all that information is right there as you're making the schedule, or as you're discussing making a schedule, I should say, as you're looking for teachers to fill these jobs. Another benefit to utilizing an ERP system in higher education is that you can lower IT costs. This is sometimes done by reducing the number of employees on site. A university is typically able to do this after implementing an ERP system, because before the ERP system, the number of IT employees, they're typically acting as software developers, having to constantly upgrade and constantly patch these old legacy systems. But once you have an ERP system in place, the patches and upgrades are done by the vendor. So basically, what ends up happening is that the IT employees, their scope and nature of what they do every day, their mission, will change. Instead of being constantly, upgrading and patching and modifying and doing all that stuff with the older systems, these legacy systems, they're instead going to go to more of a support role instead of the developer role. What I mean by support role is that, take for instance the IT help desk at the Salmon Library. Those guys are not software developing at all. They more respond to issues with, you get locked out of Banner, a printer isn't working, a switch goes wrong, like what happened when we were working in the SAP lab. Just typical, almost janitor kind of stuff. You can save money because once they switch to that capacity, you don't need as many guys working as software developers. So, say you could go from having 20 software developers and then 20 guys working in a support role to help sustain these older systems that are just not working real great. But once you get an ERP system brought in, you could go down from 40 guys to just 10 guys. You can entirely let go of those 20 IT guys that were functioning as software developers. You might even be able to cut down at least half of your IT, uh, well, help desk kind of guys. That's because an ERP system is going to be more stable. A lot of the support is going to come from the vendor, and that's just what could happen. Also, another IT cost reduction that could happen is if you're using a cloud-based ERP, then you could possibly reduce operating costs. The way this happens is that with legacy systems, a lot of the information is stored in servers that are housed on site. So what that means is that the university is paying for housing these servers, and it's one thing you have to pay for the room, you have to pay for the AC, you have to pay for the janitors to go in and clean the place. But then you also have to pay for regular upgrades to the software. What if there's a new hardware upgrade? You have to pay for the guys maintaining the servers themselves, cleaning the servers, all this stuff. And with a cloud-based ERP, you could pretty much let go of all of that. The servers are going to be housed somewhere off-site. You'll just have to have your help desk make sure you have a solid connection there and that it's not going in and out. It's a much simpler thing to have happen. An ERP system can also help certain financial and admission aids processes be accomplished automatically. Legacy admission systems have potential students submit a paper-based application, which is then read and analyzed by another person. This is the way it was done for I don't even know how many years, but thinking about it logically, I mean, how many applications are sent in every year? Like I know at law schools, they will average, well, depending on the school, but I think Alabama was about 25,000 last year. And the wait time of those applications is huge in order to hear a response back. And that's just because it takes them so long to analyze them. I don't think any of those law schools use an ERP for their application process. So it can take forever, and then also mistakes can happen because it's a person going over your application. You know, people aren't perfect. Working for so many hours, there's a chance they could make a mistake. But what an ERP gives you is that the ERP system will either automatically accept or deny or offer scholarships automatically based on certain criteria. The person has to do basically nothing. Like at UEH, for example, we apply online through there, and the application process is done as soon as you've applied and been accepted. A person doesn't have to do anything. I think what happens is they get sent an email, and then it goes to review, and then they talk about it a little bit, and then you either get the scholarship or you don't. They completely cut out the problem of having a person have to enter all the information from paper or just to analyze it on the paper. It's a lot more automatic and it's optimized with an ERP. It's just a much better process. Another benefit of using an ERP system in higher education are the student and teacher tools. For example, teachers can monitor student activity within the student's class module. Teachers will have access to data such as when did the student first access his exam, when did the student first turn in his exam, what file extension was the file in, how often students are talking to each other, whether students are talking to each other at all, whether students have checked their email, all sorts of information. Students also, students and teachers can email each other messages and attachments through the ERP. It'll have a dedicated email client, which it can be pretty helpful. And then there's also the grade database, where teachers will assign grades into this centralized grade database, and then students can then view them. And the way this works is, say you have a week in between classes and you take an exam, and the teacher could grade it immediately and then upload your grade onto the grade database, and then the student can go on and check it and see how well they did on the exam. I'm pretty sure this is supposed to speed up the grading process, but some teachers take a lot longer than a week to grade an exam, and you're just going to have to wait and get it in person like the old days. Another example of a benefit of an ERP system in higher education are that certain key student documents can be stored online. An example of a key student document that's usually stored online is your unofficial transcript. The benefit to your unofficial transcript being stored online is that a student can view it or print it off whenever they want. Another aspect to it is that changes to the unofficial transcript are made through the ERP. For example, say the admissions database needs to make a change in your unofficial transcript. The change is first done in the admissions database. For example, say going from undergraduate to graduate through the JUMP program, and then that change is also made in your unofficial transcript. You're bumped up from undergrad to graduate. This change would require a minimal amount of input from users. Another example would be with the financial database. Say that you fall behind on payments and you fall out of good standing to bad standing, and the result of that is that you can't sign up for classes. So it also crosses over to another database. Once you make good on your payments and you're bumped back up to good standing, the hold on your account is wiped and you're good to go. And the last example is that with the grade database, say you manage to have an average of, I think it's a 3.5 GPA, you then become a cum laude scholar. Cum laude. And then say you go from a 3.5 to a 3.7, and then you're bumped up to a magna cum laude scholar. That's something that's handled automatically by the system, requires little input from users. And another key student document that's filed online is the financial aid application. But what's so cool about UAH is you don't actually have to fill that out. That's something that's completed automatically during your initial online application. And one of the benefits of this happening is that students will know much sooner about the result of certain scholarships. And this will aid them in knowing whether to make a judgment as to whether to attend or not. Or the financial aid application can be filled out online at a later date. But still, the fact that it's filled out online and not in person or on paper means that the person who then has to read that application will not have to then input it into a system or a database or file it away somewhere. So the end result of all of that is that the scholarship process can be greatly expedited, and students will know much sooner about the scholarship process, whether they're accepted to the university or not, will enable them to make a decision about whether to attend the university much sooner.
Thanks, Ryan. Advancement at a university is essentially the fundraising arm for a university. This department will ask for major gifts, plan gifts, host fundraising events, and basically tries to locate funding to sustain the institution. Advancement can benefit from the use of an ERP, or at least the integration of a CRM, or customer relationship management, with an ERP. This integration will help streamline the processes that cross departments, such as recording donations, tracking grants, and managing events. When a donation is recorded, it is coded in order to meet donor intent. This must be provided to the accounting department. If advancement and accounting have an integrated system, there will be less duplication of efforts. For example, I work in the advancement portion of Hudson Alpha, and currently accounting and advancement have separate databases. After a donation is processed by advancement, accounting then is provided a batch sheet along with the checks, which they also have to complete their own data entry for to record the donation in their system. So there's duplication of data entry right off the bat. Currently, we are migrating to a new accounting system that integrates with the advancement database so that the two systems can talk to each other. Once advancement enters the donation, it can then be posted by accounting through their system. The next part that is very helpful for advancement is grants management. And I touched on grants management earlier when we were discussing nonprofit accounting. So grants managers need a system that allows them to track the process of a grant. And here I've designed for you kind of a basic walkthrough of the grant process. So a request for proposal will become available, and it will either require a letter of intent, which is an abbreviated proposal, or a full grant proposal. If it starts with a letter of intent, you will go down to the right side, you submit your letter of intent, and you're either declined or you're invited to apply for a full grant. If you're declined, you will just simply enter that into the database and close the grant and move on to your next application. But if you are invited to submit a full grant, you will then move over to the left side of this diagram. You'll submit your full grant proposal, and if the grant is not funded, you will record the reason why. And And throughout this whole process, you're uploading documents to the database so that you can see what you have submitted to this organization. If your grant is funded, you'll continue down the left side of this diagram. You will need to supply a tax letter and other methods of stewardship to the organization, whether that's a thank you lunch or handwritten notes or invitations, and there's just different things that you do to maintain that relationship with that foundation. So, and then the final step would be is if after receiving this grant, you're required to report anything back to the foundation, you would report those deliverables and track that in the database. So grants management in an ERP system, it's incredibly beneficial because you can track and automate most of this process. And you can also use it as data for if you're going back. So you didn't get funded last year, so next year this grant or RFP has come up again. You can look back and see what you've applied for, see the reason maybe why you were declined for this grant, and then make better decisions when writing your next grant. The final thing I'll touch on is that an ERP or an integrated CRM can also assist with the management of events. These systems can help keep event budgets on track, maintain lists of sponsors and attendees, arrange seating, as well as many other aspects that come with an event. An ERP or CRM that is built for a nonprofit understands these needs and accommodates for them. Often they have mobile apps that can correspond to make check-in at events seamless as well. For example, I manage the Razor's Edge database at Hudson Alpha, and through the use of this database, I can manage our events from all aspects. I can see how many donors we have for the event. I can set a capacity so that we don't oversell an event. I can keep track of our event budget. I can see our revenue, and several other things that I won't keep going into. One of the biggest benefits is the day of, we are constantly receiving seating updates, like so-and-so wants to sit here, or an elected official will show up that we weren't expecting, and so we have to make accommodations for that. Previously, all the seating was done in an Excel spreadsheet, and if there was a change made, you had to go to each of your volunteers at the event and tell them, hey, we've made this change, and they would write it down. Well, now our database has a mobile app that goes along with it, and so if I have an instance like that, I can make the change in the database, and it pushes out to all the iPads that we have at the event. So it's just very seamless, and it makes everything, the integration makes everything much easier to deal with. During our research, we had some trouble finding some drawbacks that were specific to ERPs in higher education. The largest one that really stuck out to us was that it's actually pretty cost prohibitive, especially depending on the size of your university. As an ERP can cost tens of millions of dollars and years to implement. So this was the only one that really stuck out to us as being a struggle for higher education institutions. Otherwise, they had very similar problems that other companies and institutions face, such as scope creep, what type of implementation will work for their organization, such as the Big Bang or phased implementation, and retention of employees. So below we've included a list of ERP vendors that are out there on the market. This was just a quick search, and these were the top 5 that came up. SAP, Oracle, Ellucian, Banner, which is what we use at UAH, which is also integrated with Canvas. And there's also Genzabar and Three Rivers. These are all definitely scalable depending on the size of your organization. I did some research on the organizations that use each of these, and their class or their school sizes range from in the 1,000 arena all the way up to tens of thousands of students. So, and it was, SAP would have each of these differences, as well as Oracle and Genzabar and all of those. So each one of these is scalable. It's just dependent upon which one works best for your university, and that's something that you'll have to determine as you are starting the process. Thank you for listening to our presentation on ERP and higher education. From our presentation, you should have learned why organizations need an ERP, including higher education institutions. What solutions does higher education need specifically from an ERP? And the benefits of an ERP for higher education in the following areas of enrollment, financial aid, academic services, grants management, student systems, the role of IT, and advancement.